The crowd cheered as the last of the wedding guests filtered out of the grand hall. The night had been nothing short of spectacular, filled with lavish decorations, high-end fashion, and the unmistakable shimmer of wealth. But amidst all the glitz, something felt off, something Daniel couldn't quite put his finger on. He had won the bet. He had married her, the woman he had chosen on a whim, a woman who had been his maid just days ago. He could still hear the laughter of his friends echoing in his ears. It had all been a joke, a challenge, a dare. They had all thought he would never go through with it. But here they were, standing at the altar, and Amanda was now his wife. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to savor the moment. After all, he had never expected to find someone like her in his life. She was young, beautiful, and humble. Everything his usual circle of wealthy friends wasn't. There was something mysterious about her, something that captivated him. But now, as the night stretched on, Daniel couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Amanda, his new bride, seemed different. She wasn't reacting the way he had expected. She wasn't smiling as he had thought she would, wasn't basking in the attention of their marriage. She seemed distant, calm even, as if this night was just another thing to get through. They had barely spoken to each other since the ceremony ended, and as they entered the private suite, Daniel tried to break the silence. "So," he said, trying to sound casual, "how does it feel to be Mrs. Daniel Harrington?" Amanda turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a look that was hard to read. "It feels surreal," she said softly. Her voice, though calm, had an edge to it, something that made Daniel pause. She'd been so different than the other women he knew, unpredictable, mysterious. He had been intrigued by her, drawn to her in a way he didn't fully understand. But now, standing here with her alone, he began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Surreal?" Daniel repeated, a bit confused. "I thought you'd be, more excited about it." Amanda didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the window, staring out at the view of the city below. The room was silent, and Daniel's anxiety began to grow. He had expected passion, excitement. He had imagined that their wedding night would be like the stories he'd heard from friends, full of energy and lust. But this was nothing like what he had imagined. Finally, she turned back to him, her face unreadable. "Daniel," she said, her voice low, "I hope you realize what this means." Daniel furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" Amanda took a step closer to him, her expression shifting. It was subtle, but Daniel could feel the change. There was a hardness in her gaze now, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "You thought this was a game," she said, almost coldly. "But it's not. It never was." Daniel blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" His stomach twisted with unease, but he tried to mask it with a forced laugh. "Amanda, it's a bet. We both knew the rules. You win, you get the money, and I get you." His words hung awkwardly in the air. Amanda's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile, but there was no warmth in it. "It's never been about money for me," she replied, her voice steady, but with an undertone of something darker. "And it's not about you either." Daniel's confusion deepened. "What are you saying?" Amanda walked toward him, slowly and deliberately, until she was standing just a few inches away. Her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time since they met, Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "This," Amanda said, her voice dropping even lower, "was never just a bet. It's about something bigger, something that's been in motion long before we met." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" His voice came out more frantic than he intended. Amanda's eyes softened for just a second before returning to their cold, calculating stare. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. The edges were crisp, almost too perfect. As she handed it to him, Daniel's hands shook slightly. He stared at it for a moment before tearing it open. Inside was a single, neatly folded sheet of paper, written in elegant handwriting. The words on the page were brief, but enough to send a ripple of unease through him. This was never about a bet. You've just been chosen. The game has only just begun. Daniel's blood ran cold as the weight of the message settled over him. He looked up at Amanda, but she was no longer standing still. She was walking toward the door, her back turned. To him, "You've been a part of something much bigger than you realize, Daniel," she said, her voice distant, almost as if she were speaking to someone else. And now, there's no going back. Daniel stood frozen in place, the paper still clutched in his hand. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead as he tried to process the words. He was no longer sure what game he was playing. And worse, he wasn't sure if he had ever truly been in control. The night air hung heavy, thick with tension. The wedding had been nothing short of extravagant, the kind of event that would have made headlines in the tabloids, if not for the unexpected twist that was unfolding in the shadows. For all the glitter and glamour of their lavish ceremony, everything was about to change, and neither Amanda nor her new husband Daniel had any idea what was in store. Daniel had married Amanda on a whim, just a bet between friends that had spiraled far beyond the joke it was meant to be. She was young, beautiful, and had a fire in her eyes that Daniel couldn't quite ignore. But what truly captivated him wasn't her beauty alone. It was the quiet intensity she carried, the way she looked at the world as if she understood more. And then she let on. She wasn't like the women in his usual circles, those who clung to the opulence of wealth, showing off their latest designer bags and flaunting their social status. Amanda didn't care for any of that. She was humble, grounded, but there was an air of mystery around her that made Daniel curious, intrigued, and so he married her. Not because he was in love, but because he had dared to make a bet, he thought. He could easily win, but as he stood beside her now, in the silence of their grand bedroom, the enormity of what he had done was beginning to gnaw at him. The wedding night, once filled with excitement and anticipation, now felt oddly suffocating. Daniel's thoughts drifted back to his friends who had watched the ceremony with keen eyes, all of them aware of the bet that had led to this moment. The whispers that followed him around the venue, the knowing smiles exchanged between his closest companions. They hadn't meant it to be a joke. They had expected him to fall in love, to be taken by the mystery that Amanda carried with her. But what they didn't know was that Amanda was no ordinary woman, and tonight Daniel was going to learn that the hard way. Amanda stood by the window, her back to him, looking out over the city lights as if lost in thought. Her profile was serene, almost too calm for someone in her position. Daniel couldn't help but study her. There was something off about the way she was behaving, something that didn't match the excitement he had expected from his new bride. "Are you okay?" Daniel's voice broke the silence, his tone a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Amanda didn't turn to face him right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her gaze lingering on the distant horizon. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice low, steady, and almost eerie in its calmness. "I'm fine," she said, her words carrying an undertone that Daniel couldn't quite place. Daniel frowned, his unease growing. He didn't know what he had expected from Amanda, but it wasn't this distant, almost cold response. It was as if she was a different person altogether. He had imagined their wedding night to be full of passion, excitement, a celebration of their union, but instead there was a strange heaviness in the air, a tension he couldn't shake. "Are you sure?" Daniel pressed, stepping closer to her. "You've been quiet all night." Amanda turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. There was something about her gaze, something unsettling, that made his breath catch in his throat. Her eyes weren't the warm, inviting brown he had gotten used to. They were cold, calculating as if she was sizing him up, measuring his every move. "I'm just thinking," she replied, her voice steady, but with an underlying sharpness. "Thinking about the consequences of this bet of yours." Daniel's blood ran cold. For the first time since he had met Amanda, he felt a genuine sense of fear. What did she mean by consequences? He had married her on a whim, yes, but there was something about her words, the way she said them, that made his stomach twist. "You knew what this was, Amanda," Daniel said, trying to sound confident, even though doubt was creeping into his mind. "This was just for fun. A bet. Nothing more." Amanda's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone who had all the answers, someone who knew far more than they were letting on. "I know exactly what this is," she said softly, stepping toward him. "But you don't. Not yet." Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but before he could speak, Amanda reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, delicate envelope. The kind of envelope that was too elegant, too pristine to be just another piece of paper. She handed it to him, her eyes never leaving his. "Open it," she instructed. Daniel hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly as he took the envelope from her hand. His heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to throw it away, to forget about this night and walk away. But curiosity got the better of him, and with a deep breath, he tore open the envelope and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was short, written in elegant, almost flowing handwriting, but the words on the page were enough to make Daniel's blood run cold. "You thought this was a game, Daniel, but it's not. It never was. You'll soon see why." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that Daniel couldn't quite grasp. He looked up at Amanda, his eyes searching for answers, but she just stood there watching him, waiting. "What is this?" Daniel asked, his voice shaky now. "What are you trying to tell me?" Amanda stepped closer, her eyes narrowing, her expression hardening. "You'll find out soon enough. But remember this, Daniel, you made a bet you can't win. And now you'll pay the price for it." Daniel's mind raced as he tried to process what Amanda had just said. What was happening? Why did it feel like he had just stepped into a nightmare he couldn't escape? As the night wore on, Daniel found himself trapped in a game he hadn't even known he was playing, a game where the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. And Amanda, his new wife, was the one pulling the strings, orchestrating everything from the shadows. But what was her true intention? What was it that she was hiding? And most importantly, what did she mean by paying the price? The night that followed was a blur. Daniel couldn't sleep, his mind racing with questions, doubts, and an unsettling sense of dread that clung to him like a second skin. The letter Amanda had given him still lay on the side table, its words burned into his memory. "You made a bet you can't win, and now you'll pay the price for it." Those words echoed in his head as the minutes turned. In 2 hours, the quiet of the luxurious bedroom only interrupted by the occasional rustle of the wind outside. Amanda had retreated into a cold silence after handing him the letter, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing sense that he had done something far worse than simply bet on a woman he knew so little about. By the time the first light of dawn peeked through the curtains, Daniel had made a decision. He couldn't just let this go. Whatever game Amanda was playing, he needed to understand the rules. He needed to know the truth, and he needed to know it now. As he left the bedroom, he noticed Amanda was nowhere to be found. The house, though, still grand and full of wealth, felt eerily empty. It was as if the mansion itself was a hollow shell, hiding something far darker beneath its gleaming exterior. He walked slowly down the hallway, passing the portraits of previous generations of his family that lined the walls. His footsteps were the only sound, the silence amplifying the unease that crept through his body. Daniel knew he had to confront Amanda. He had to force her to reveal what she was hiding. But as the minutes ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something far bigger at play than just a simple bet. This wasn't just about a wedding or a game. It was about something much more dangerous. It wasn't long before he found her. She was sitting in the study, the room bathed in the soft early morning light that filtered through the tall windows. She didn't look up when he entered, as though she had been waiting for him. Her posture was straight, her hands folded neatly, in her lap, and her face was as unreadable as ever. "Amanda," Daniel said, his voice firm. "We need to talk." She finally looked up, her eyes calm but piercing, as though she were analyzing him from the inside out. "About last night?" "About everything," Daniel replied, walking towards the desk. This bet. Your letter. What is all of this really about?" Amanda didn't answer right away. She just stared at him, her eyes unblinking. The silence stretched on, suffocating, until Daniel thought he might scream from the tension in the air. Finally, she spoke, her voice measured and soft, but with an underlying coldness that made Daniel's skin crawl. "You think you know what's going on, Daniel? You think you can just walk into this, make a bet, and walk away with nothing more than a pretty face to call your wife. But you're wrong." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This isn't just about you. It's about something far bigger, something you wouldn't even be able to understand if I tried to explain it to you." Daniel's frustration boiled over. He clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. "Stop playing games, Amanda. I want the truth, now." Amanda stood up, her movements graceful but deliberate. She walked over to the large bookshelf that lined one wall of the study, her fingers tracing the spines of the books as if she were searching for something. Finally, she pulled a small, leather-bound journal from the shelf and turned back to face him. "This," she said, holding the journal out to him, "is my story. The story I've kept hidden from everyone, including you." Daniel took the journal, his curiosity piqued, despite the growing sense of dread that clawed at him. As he flipped open the cover, he saw that the pages were filled with neat handwriting, though the ink had started to fade in some places, as if the words had been written a long time ago. He began to read aloud, his voice quiet at first. "It was a long time ago. I was just a girl, trying to survive in a world that didn't care about me." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Daniel could feel in his chest. As he read on, the story began to unfold. It was a story of hardship, of loss, of betrayal. Amanda had grown up in a world that had been unforgiving, where survival wasn't guaranteed, and where the only way to move forward was to play the game of life with ruthlessness. "I didn't ask for this life," she had written. "I didn't. Asked to be born into a world where people like me were disposable. But I had no choice. I had to do what I had to do to survive, and that meant making a deal with someone who could give me what I needed." Daniel's mind raced as he continued to read. The story Amanda told was nothing like the woman he had married. She spoke of a past filled with shadows, of a dark world where she had been forced to make choices that Daniel couldn't even begin to understand. She had been part of a network, an underground society that dealt in secrets, power, and money. A society that operated outside the law, where deals were made in shadows and betrayal was a given. He turned the page, his heart pounding in his chest. The journal's next entry was even more chilling than the last. "The man I made the deal with." Amanda's handwriting grew more jagged, as if the words were painful to write. "He promised me everything. He promised me the power to escape. He promised me freedom. But in return, I had to give him something in exchange. My silence. Daniel's blood ran cold as he realized that Amanda's past was far darker than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just some woman he had bet on. She was part of something much larger, something that could ruin him if he wasn't careful. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. "Why? Keep it a secret." Amanda's expression remained unreadable. "Because you wouldn't understand, Daniel. And because I didn't want you to get involved in something you couldn't control." Daniel slammed the journal shut, the weight of her words sinking in. He had married a woman who had spent her entire life hiding from the truth, a woman who was tangled in a web of lies, secrets, and betrayal. And now it seemed the past was coming for her, and for him. Daniel had spent the last hour pacing back and forth, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the fragments of Amanda's story. The journal was a cryptic map to a world he couldn't even begin to understand, but now it was too late. He was already tangled in its web. He had believed the life he was leading was one of control, of choices made in the light of day. But Amanda's past, her secrets, had proven otherwise. In the quiet of the study, Daniel's thoughts circled back to one burning question. Why had Amanda chosen him? What had she seen in him that made him worthy of being the subject of her bet? And why, after everything, had she kept him in the dark? He was no longer just a participant in a random game. He had been marked for something far greater, something he had yet to uncover. But as the hours passed and Amanda remained silent, the weight of his predicament grew heavier. It wasn't just her past that Daniel had to worry about. It was the consequences of his own choices. He had become a pawn in a game that he hadn't agreed to play, and now he was beginning to see the full scope of what it meant to be entangled with Amanda. Just as Daniel was about to turn back to the journal, the door to the study creaked open. He spun around, his heart racing, but it wasn't Amanda who entered. Instead, it was one of his closest friends, Charles, the one person who had known about the bet from the beginning. Charles. Daniel's voice was edged with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Charles stepped inside, his face tight with worry. "We need to talk, Daniel." Daniel's instincts told him that something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "What's going on?" Charles closed the door behind him, his eyes darting nervously around the room before settling on Daniel. "It's about Amanda," he said, his voice low. "There's more you need to know." Daniel's blood ran cold. What could Charles possibly know that he didn't? He had already learned things that shattered everything he had thought he understood about Amanda. But Charles's serious expression told him that the worst was yet to come. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, his voice strained. Charles took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to reveal a truth that would change everything. "The woman you married, she's not who you think she is, and neither is her past." Daniel's pulse quickened. He felt the ground shift beneath his feet, the sense of control slipping further and further away. "What do you know, Charles? What aren't you telling me?" Charles hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the desk and picked up the journal that Amanda had left behind. He glanced down at it, then back at Daniel. "I've known Amanda for years, longer than you. Can imagine. I didn't want to tell you, but now it's too late. You're already in this deeper than you realize." Daniel's frustration was reaching its peak. "Charles, stop playing games. What's going on?" Charles sighed and ran a hand through his hair, as if wrestling with his conscience. "Amanda didn't just make a deal with a man for power. That's not the whole story. There's something much more dangerous at play here, something I didn't think you were ready for." Daniel's mind was spinning, his thoughts colliding, in a whirlwind of confusion and dread. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Charles lowered his voice even further, his eyes darting to the door as though to make sure no one else was listening. You know about the underground network she was a part of, right? Daniel nodded, his throat dry. What you don't know is that Amanda wasn't just one of the players. She was one of the architects. She helped build the whole damn thing. She's not just a survivor of that world, Daniel. She's one of its masterminds. Daniel staggered back, as if the weight of Charles's words had physically struck him. No, that's not possible. She can't be— She is, Charles interrupted, his voice sharp with urgency. And she's been playing you, Daniel. Everything about this marriage, this bet. It's all part of her plan. You were never just a bystander. You were meant to be involved from the start. Daniel felt his world crumbling around him. He had been duped, played, manipulated into thinking that this was just some trivial wager. But now the stakes had changed. Amanda's coldness, her silence, now it made sense. She had never been the innocent woman he had believed her to be. She had been calculating every move, every word, all along. I don't understand, Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let me walk into this trap? Charles lowered his gaze, a look of guilt crossing his face. I didn't want to get involved. I thought you were strong enough to handle it, that you could see through her lies, but I see now I was wrong. This is bigger than anything we can control. Daniel's mind was reeling, but one thing stood clear. He had to find out what Amanda was truly after. He couldn't let her continue this game at his expense. He had to confront her once and for all. You need to talk to her, Charles urged, his voice firm. You need to make her tell you everything. If you don't, you'll be dragged into something that you'll never be able to escape. Daniel nodded, though his resolve was shaky. He was terrified of what he might discover, but he knew there was no turning back now. He had to face Amanda and demand the truth. Daniel's hand trembled as he gripped the door handle to the master bedroom, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He had to confront Amanda. He couldn't let her control this situation any longer. Charles' words had been a revelation. Amanda had been playing him from the very beginning, and he had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. Now, as the realization of his own vulnerability gnawed at him, he knew there was no turning back. The air in the house felt colder than it had the night before. The grandeur of the mansion, the polished marble floors, the sweeping staircases, it all seemed to mock him now. It was a gilded cage, a place where his choices no longer mattered. Amanda had trapped him in her world, and she wasn't going to let him escape easily. With one final breath, Daniel opened the door. Amanda was standing by the window again, her back to him, gazing out over the city. The light from the setting sun bathed the room in a soft, golden glow, but it did nothing to soften the chill that had settled between them. She didn't turn when he entered, as if she had been waiting for him. It was as if nothing had changed. I knew I'd come, Daniel said, his voice steady but his heart pounding. Amanda finally turned, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that made Daniel's breath catch. I was hoping you would, she replied, her tone calm, almost too calm. Daniel stepped into the room, his resolve hardening with every step. We need to talk, now. Amanda didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence between them felt suffocating. But then she nodded slowly, her lips curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I've been waiting for you to realize what you've gotten yourself into. Daniel clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. I want the truth, Amanda. I don't care about the games anymore. I want to know what this is really about. Why me? Why this bet? Her smile faded, replaced by something darker. You still don't get it, do you, Daniel? You never were a part of the game. You were always the prize. The words hit him like a slap in the face. The prize, the realization sent a cold wave of dread washing over him. Amanda wasn't just playing him. She had been using him all along, and now she was about to reveal the full extent of her plan. You've "Been using me from the start," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For what? What do you want from me?" Amanda stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I don't want anything from you, Daniel. You misunderstand. You're not the one who's important. You were never the one who mattered." Daniel's mind raced as he tried to make sense of her words. He had been a pawn in her game, but now it seemed that the game was bigger than he had ever imagined. The stakes had escalated, and the cost was far greater than he could have ever anticipated. "I don't believe you," Daniel said, shaking his head. "You can't possibly mean that. You married me. You put me through all of this. For what? To what end?" Amanda's eyes softened for a brief moment, a flicker of something that resembled regret flashing across her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, calculating gaze that Daniel had grown accustomed to. "The truth, Daniel, is that this was never about you. It was never about us. This was always about something much bigger, something you were never meant to understand." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He had a sinking feeling that he was about to learn something that would change everything. He had no idea what kind of mess he had walked into, but it was clear now that he wasn't going to be able to just walk away. The price of his ignorance was about to become all too real. "You're a part of something, Daniel," Amanda continued, her voice low and deliberate. "Something much older and more powerful than you could ever imagine. And I brought you here to see it, to show you what happens when people like us get involved in that world." Daniel's mind raced. "What do you mean, people like us? What world? What are you talking about?" Amanda's expression hardened. "You think this is just some kind of a bet, a joke, something trivial? No, this has been in motion long before we ever met. You were always going to be involved in this, whether you liked it or not. I just needed to make sure you were in the right place at the right time." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to piece it all together. This wasn't just about a marriage. It wasn't even just about Amanda's past. It was about something far more sinister, something that had been in motion long before he had even entered the picture. "You're part of something dangerous," Daniel whispered, the realization settling in. A secret, a conspiracy. Amanda didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something darker, something that suggested she had known this moment was inevitable. "You're not wrong," she said at last. "But it's more than just a conspiracy. It's a network, a power structure that has been operating in the shadows for generations. And you, Daniel, you've been chosen to be a part of it. You've been chosen to help it grow." Daniel took a step back, his mind spinning. He had been chosen. For what? And by whom? "You're not just a pawn, Daniel," Amanda continued. "You're a key player in something much larger than yourself. And if you think you can walk away from it now, you're sorely mistaken." Daniel felt the floor beneath him shift. He was trapped. He had been trapped from the very beginning, and he hadn't even known it. "You think this is a game," Amanda said, her voice hardening. "But this is real. You're in this now, whether you like it or not." The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Amanda hadn't just used him for a bet. She had used him to get him involved in something far more dangerous, something that had been carefully orchestrated for years. And now there was no turning back. The silence that followed Amanda's words felt suffocating. The walls of the room seemed to close in around Daniel as the weight of the truth pressed down on him. He had walked into a world he never understood, a world where nothing was as it seemed, a world where he had been nothing more than a pawn in a game much larger than he could have ever imagined. "You think this is just a bet, Daniel?" Amanda's voice was almost mocking now. "You think this is just about us, about some twisted wager? You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Daniel's chest tightened. His mind was racing, his heart pounding. There was no way he could just walk away from this. No matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't. He was trapped. in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation. And Amanda, the woman he had married, was at the center of it all. "I don't understand," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "Why me? Why this? What do you want from me?" Amanda stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. There was no sympathy in her gaze, no regret, just the cold, calculating eyes of someone who had been playing a much larger game. "I never wanted anything from you, Daniel. You were never the target. You were the means to an end." The words hit him harder than any blow could. His mind reeled as he tried to comprehend what Amanda was saying. He wasn't the target? Then, what was he? "You were meant to be the bridge," Amanda continued, her tone growing more intense. "The one who would connect us to the next phase of the plan. The one who would unlock the doors to a new world. You see, Daniel, you're a key figure in something much bigger than either of us. You're a part of something that will change everything." Daniel's stomach churned. The last few days had been nothing but confusion and fear. But now the truth was finally beginning to take shape, albeit in a way he never could have imagined. He wasn't just an innocent victim caught up in Amanda's web. He was a player, in a game of power, corruption, and hidden agendas. But why had she married him? Why had she gone so far to entrap him? "You still don't get it, do you?" Amanda said, her voice filled with a dark amusement. "You're part of a network, Daniel, a network that has been operating for decades, and the bet you were part of, that was just the beginning. You were never meant to be an innocent bystander. You were meant to take part in this." Daniel's mind spun. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was far too horrifying to fully comprehend. The network, the power structure, the people behind it all, and now it was his turn to play a role. "Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning?" Daniel's voice was raw with emotion. "Why didn't you give me a choice?" Amanda's expression softened. For just a moment, but only for a moment. Then her face hardened again, the mask of the manipulator slipping back into place. "You wouldn't have understood, Daniel. I didn't want you to be a part of this, but I had no choice. You had to be involved, whether you liked it or not. You were chosen for a reason." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Chosen for what?" Amanda didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, ornate box. She placed it on the table between them, her fingers lingering on the lid for a moment, as if she were deciding whether or not to reveal its contents. "This," she said finally, "is why you're here." The box was small, about the size of a jewelry box, but its presence was overwhelming. It seemed out of place in the otherwise pristine room. Daniel stared at it, his heart racing as the weight of the moment grew heavier. Amanda pushed the box toward him. "Open it." Daniel's fingers trembled as he reached for the box. The urge to turn away was strong, but his curiosity pushed him forward. He lifted the lid slowly, almost afraid of what he might find inside. Inside the box was a small, intricately carved key. It was made of some dark, unknown metal, its surface gleaming in the light. It looked ancient, almost otherworldly. There was something about it that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. "What is this?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. He could hardly believe the sight before him. It was as if he were holding a piece of something much larger than himself, something that had been hidden from him for far too long. Amanda's eyes locked with his. "That key," she said, her voice low and grave, "is the key to everything. To the network, to the power that's been behind all of this. And now it's yours. You're the one who will use it to unlock the next phase. You'll be the one who takes us into the future." Daniel felt as though the floor had been pulled out from under him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about a bet. It was about power, control, and a secret world that had been operating behind the scenes for far too long. "What am I supposed to do with it?" Daniel asked, his voice shaking. "You'll know when the time comes," Amanda replied. "But for now, you need to understand one thing. You're in this, Daniel. You can't back out. This is who you are now. This is the life you chose the moment you accepted my bet." Daniel stood there, the key heavy in his hand, feeling like the walls were closing in around him. He had entered this world willingly, but now he realized he had been a part of something much darker than he could have ever imagined. And the worst part, he had no idea what to do next. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: his life, as he had known it, was over. He was no longer a man with choices. He was a man bound by fate, by the network Amanda had pulled him into. And now there was no turning back. Amanda's voice broke through his thoughts. "You wanted the truth, Daniel. This is it. The life you were meant to live, the life you were chosen for." Daniel stared at the key in his hand, his heart heavy with the weight of his new reality. He had thought he could escape, that he could walk away from all of this. But now, as the truth settled in, he realized there was no escape, not anymore. The key was his future, his prison, and his purpose all rolled into one. And as Amanda's cold, calculating gaze met his, Daniel knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same. The end.